Hey everyone, and welcome to the tutorial series for the procedural city generator. In this video, we'll be taking a look at city sections. This is the third video in the performance series. If you haven't watched the past two videos, I recommend you watch them in order. The first one was just general performance, how to prepare your assets so they're performant in your city, and how to change some blueprints to modify the max draw distance for your meshes, and that should make a pretty big difference as far as performance. The second video was all about how to dynamically change the draw distance or call distance of assets in your city based on gameplay. That was the last video. And finally today we'll be taking a look at city sections. And the main idea is that even though you are optimizing your assets to be as performant as possible, there is a limit of how many assets you want to have loaded in Unreal, or at least Unreal Engine 4. So ideally what you would do is you would divide your really big cities or mega cities into discrete sections, and then you can load them and unload them as the player moves around. That's exactly what we're going to be doing today. So if we go here to the second slide, we're going to be showing you how to create your city sections. We'll be generating your assets, right? Your buildings, props, foliage, whatever. And then I'll show you how to do the different setups. I have three different setups here. A section loading, which is going to be a custom solution to load and unload the neighbors in the sections. Then we're going to be using level streaming. That's probably going to be the most performant one, where you're actually going to divide those sections into sub-levels, and then my blueprint will automatically load and unload those levels. So it should be very, very easy to set up. And finally, there's a hybrid method that basically combines those two. So let's go ahead and jump into Unreal. And before I started the recording, I went ahead and created a little city so we're not kind of wasting a lot of time. But if I go ahead and select the actual city here, and of course I call this city section or section city. If I click on the city limits, you'll see that our limits are 2000 by X and 3000 by Y. This is a fairly small city. You probably don't need to do any of this for this size city, but again, I'm trying to keep things fairly small so it's easier for us to do it in the recording. If you have a really, really big city, like 6,000 by 8,000 or anything like that, or 10,000 by 10,000, we're talking about like this entire map, a massive, massive city, then you absolutely want to use sections. So the first thing you want to do is obviously create your city as you normally would. You can create your roads, that's fine, as I did here. But before you spawn your buildings, this is important, you need to come back to zones. And then there's a section called city sections, obviously, that we skipped in the last video. And this is where you're going to be spawning your sections. So right now for my city, I've spawned my roads and I even have my zones. So let me just show you real quick. So I have industrial zone, other zone, and rural, and you can see that I have them right here. So you're free to design your city any way you want. It's just that before you spawn your buildings, you want to make sure that you set up your sections. So right now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on Use Sections. And you can verify that this setting is correct by clicking on the city generator, and you're going to see that this boolean here is selected, use sections. So we know that that is working. So use sections, and then you're going to have the size of the section by X and by Y. And right now I'm going to leave it as 1000 by 1000, but you can change this. You can make them bigger or smaller based on your use case. Click on spawn sections, and immediately you'll see this happen. I'm going to go back a little bit more. Whoops. And you can see that we have 6 different sections, and I'm going to select all my city sections right here on the outliner and hide the marker just so we can see a little bit better what's going on. So these are basically volumes, and you can see that they're exactly matching the city limits. So because this was 2000, so obviously 1000, 1000, and then 3 in this area. And each city section, you can see that there are several settings here. So the first thing we'll do once we have the city sections is we're going to select all of the sections, go down to this section for utilities, and click on Get City Sections, and you'll see that we have the city sections array selected here, and then Get Neighbors. Now, if you select any one of those, you'll see that we have each individual section will have a reference to all other sections, and then each section will have a list of neighbors, which are going to be 3 or 4. In other words, what are the adjacent sections that we need to load? So if the player is in this section here, what we're basically going to do is we're going to load the current section and the neighbors, which is going to be this, this, and this. But if the player is here, then we're going to be loading all of these because they're all neighbors, they're all adjacent. So if you have a really, really big city, keep that in mind, that the bigger the section, the more content you're going to be loading because we're doing the neighbors automatically. All right, so that's pretty much it for now. We can go ahead and spawn our buildings. And for this example, what I'm going to do is I am only going to be spawning the buildings just to keep things simple. Obviously, in your own example, spawn your buildings, spawn your props, and spawn your foliage. That way you have the city exactly how you would want it. But if I go down here, just to show you guys, my city has been generated. I have my buildings. You have industrial here and then rural. And then we have this simple building section here. So everything here has been generated. I'm going to save all. And then I'm going to go ahead and select all of my sections now that my actors have been generated. And I'm going to click on Get Section Actors. And again, if I click on any of those, you'll see that now we have list of actors, which is going to be all of the actors, and then it's going to subdivide it by categories. In this case, it's 117 buildings. Obviously, we don't have props or foliage, but those would be filled out if you have those. Same thing if I click here, notice that we have a lot more, 5,100 buildings, because obviously they're a lot smaller. Okay, so with that said, if I do nothing else and I come all the way here and I click on play, let's just play in the current camera. Let's see what happens. Nothing seems to have happened. The city is exactly as it was before. You can see that we're kind of walking through the streets and nothing seems to have changed. And well, the reason for that is because by default, we aren't using any loading and unloading method. So if you're not seeing any difference, that's the reason why. All right, so let's go back. And now if we select all of our sections again, and we go down to loading method, notice that by default it's always loaded. We're going to change this to use section loading. And all this is doing is hiding and showing the actors in the correct sections and enabling and disabling collision. So this is in a way doing what you would do with draw distance, but it just sets it up in an easier way. So now if we go back to our location here and I click on play, then we see nothing. I'm just gonna click here and unit. And the reason for that is because we haven't overlapped the trigger. So if I start walking here to the section trigger, eventually once I hit the trigger, then you're gonna see what happens. So we enter the section trigger. I'm gonna eject here, and this section was loaded plus all of the neighbors. And the neighbors are gonna be this one and this one. But notice that these streets don't have any buildings because they're too far. So as I go and start moving around, notice that now, oops, some of the other sections are now loaded. So again, if I eject, this is loaded, this is loaded, but if I go all the way back, I have to move a little bit more for that. There you go. I was in one of the middle sections. If I go all the way to the end, now this section is unloaded. All right. So that's pretty much the idea. Number 3 is going to be in this area here. Right here. So we started here, and as soon as we hit this trigger, this loaded and these other 3 loaded. And then we continue going this way, and when we hit this area, then these 2 unloaded and only these 3 were loaded, right? The neighbors. So that is definitely an improvement to what we've done before in the previous videos. So you should still go ahead and do everything we've done in the past 2 videos. But if you have a massive city, this would definitely be an improvement because you're specifically hiding complete sections at a time and disabling collision. That should help you quite a bit. Now the next step is to take it further and actually use level streaming. That would be the most performant part. And the idea here is that right now all of the buildings and all of the section actors are still loaded in memory, even though I'm hiding them and disabling collision. So we actually don't want to do that. We want to unload them for performance reasons. So make sure that you go to Window, Levels, if you don't have that, and then in my case I have them right here. And right now I only have one level, which is the persistent level called Level Sections. We're going to now create sub-levels that we're going to be loading and unloading dynamically. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to go section by section. So we're going to grab this section right here. Actually, let's start from the beginning. Section 0 or section, city section right here. You can go to Zones and click on Select Section Actors. And what this is going to do, that all of the actors that were part of this zone, the 5100, are now selected. Now you can go to Levels. You can click on this little arrow here, and you can select Create New with Selected Actors. It's going to ask you to actually create a new level. I have a little sub-levels folder here, and we're just going to call this sub and then 0. Click Save. And it's going to ask you, hey, some of these references are going to break. That's okay. You can say yes to all, no problem. And notice now that we have a sub-level called sub-1, sorry, sub-0. So if we decide to hide this by clicking on the little icon here, notice that the buildings here are hidden. The difference here is that if we actually unload this level, they're not going to be present in memory. So let's go back and click on persistent level and make this current. This is going to be the current level. The blue one means the current level. And we're going to repeat this process several times. So I'm going slow now, but I'm going to go faster now going forward. So click on the other section. Select actors. Go down. And it's going to be sub-1. Yes to all. Go back here. Select the next one. Select actors. Come here. Create new with selected actors. Sub-2. Yes to all. Go back. Then click here, which is, this one here, which is 3. Select section actors. Create new with selected actors. Sub-3. Yes to all. Then we need to go to the next one here. Here, section 4. Select all the actors. Go back to levels. Create new with selected actors. Sub-4. And finally here, section 5. Select all the actors. Create new with selected actors. Sub-5. Oops. And yes to all. Cool. And you can make current. And right now by default, when you create a sub-level, the loading method or the streaming method is blueprint, which means that you have to explicitly load it, and that's what we want. So don't touch this setting. Always loaded means that you'll have to use a volume, for example, or it's always going to be loaded. But we want this to be blueprint. That's the default, so you don't have to really do anything. And right now, the last thing we want to do is we want to grab all of our sections. This is important. And we need to change the streaming method or the loading method from use section loading to use level streaming. And when you go down, we're going to have some setups here that we need to set up for loading. We need to specify the level name per section. So if we go down to sub levels here and we go to the first section down the list, we know that this is going to be loading sub 0. Then we go down the list. This is sub 1. Remember, I kept it in order. This is sub 2. Sub 3. Sub 4. And sub 5. Go ahead and click on Save All. We're going to be saving all of our sub levels. And we're going to be saving our section blueprints with the correct settings. Again, use level streaming. And now, when we go back here to the same location, which is outside of the trigger, and we click on play, it looks exactly like last time. Nothing's loaded. However, if I eject here and go to levels, we're going to see when some of these levels are loaded and unloaded. So I'm going to start walking now, and notice on the right hand side, what happens is I'm walking to the trigger. There you go. You see how they're loading? So now we're actually loading sub 1, sub 2, sub 4, and sub 5. These are all the neighbors. There are two sub levels that are not loaded, 0 and 3, which are on the other corner of the city. And we can just keep walking here and just notice on the right hand side how we're dynamically loading and unloading levels. Notice now that we're in the middle of the city. That means that the entire city, all of the neighbors will be loaded, and you can see them right here with the little eye icon. And as I move to the other side of the city, now you should see two subsections or two sub-levels be unloaded. You can see sub 2 was unloaded and sub 5 was unloaded. There you go. Everything else should work as expected, but now instead of having all those buildings in memory, you're actually using level streaming. This is the method I would recommend for big cities, mega cities. Use level streaming, and that would give you the best performance. Now, to be fair, right here, you're not noticing any difference because the city is very small, so you can see how I'm pretty much locked at 120, and you didn't really see any significant bump right here as things were loading. But again, that's because I purposely made the city small. If you have a massive city, I would highly recommend that you use this method. Finally, the last thing, and I don't think I need to show it here, but you can select all your sections here, and you can select use hybrid method. And hybrid method will basically use level streaming, but will also disable collision on the neighbors. So if you start here, it'll stream all of the neighbors from memory, from the sub-levels, but all of the neighbors will have their actors collision disabled. That gives you a little bit more performance. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I would highly recommend you look into level streaming in general, because you're gonna have to change some settings here. So for example, if you go to the project settings, streaming, you're gonna see that we have several options here that you're gonna have to play around with. You can see for level streaming, there's a lot of different settings. For example, there's a async load time limit. These are in milliseconds per frame. So you can go ahead and make some changes to these values. If you're still seeing hitches, what you would do is you can change the size of the sections. The smaller the section, obviously the less actors that are going to be inside, the less intensive is going to be to load it. And you can change the settings right here under level streaming. Play around with these values until you get an experience that is fairly smooth. That is pretty much it, guys. This is how you use city sections, and you can use them in my custom method, or you can use level streaming. Hopefully the process that we went through was easy enough to follow. I try to make it as easy as possible to use level streaming with the city. So you don't have to use my method, by the way. You can use your own custom method, but I figured this is just the easiest way of doing it. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. If you haven't joined our Discord, go ahead and join and let me know what you think in our channel. I'm still taking suggestions. I've gotten a couple of people asking me, when is this going to become kind of ready and not in early access. I still don't have a date for that. It is still in early access, which means that I'm still adding a lot of polish and taking your suggestions into consideration. So yeah, if you have any ideas on improvements, or if you find any issues, please do let me know. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful, guys. Take care, and I'll talk to you in the next video.